A group of friends decided to go camping for the weekend. They chose a remote place in the depths of the forest where there were no signs of civilization. During the hike, they heard a story from local residents that a series of brutal murders once took place in this forest and their perpetrator was never caught. Despite the warnings, the friends decided not to pay attention to them and continued on their way. Soon they discovered an old mysterious clearing where there was a scarecrow made of old clothes and straw. It looked unusually creepy and menacing. The scarecrow turned out to be so realistic that friends began to feel an unpleasant presence around them. As time passed, they began to notice that the scarecrow was changing its position. It seemed to be moving, getting closer and closer to them. Horror made friends suspect each other. They began to notice strange things, unusual footsteps behind them, words of the wind, inexplicable shadows that followed them. All of this simultaneously filled their hearts with fear. Maria, one of her friends, decided to go deep into the forest to find out about the origin of the scarecrow. When she came back, there was terror in her eyes and she couldn't say a word. At that moment, the friends realized that they had fallen into the very heart of their worst nightmare. The whole group was surrounded by unknown forces that beckoned them deep into the forest. They realized that the scarecrow was alive and served as an instrument of evil. They could not understand what was really waiting for them, but their fear only grew by the minute. Darkness enveloped the friends when the scarecrow in all his bloody glory appeared before them. They realized that it was the killer who had been hiding behind a scarecrow all these years. Now he was back to take revenge, and none of them could escape his bloody rage. The shrill cries of friends echoed through the quiet forest. One by one, they became victims of a brutal killer who ruthlessly pursued them. The scarecrow, revived and turned into an instrument of death, stood in their way, reminding them of the madness and horror that it brought. Masha, the last survivor, was locked in a deadly nightmare game. She was hiding from a mad killer, trying to remain unnoticed. With amazing speed, she realized that the only way to escape was to expose and defeat the scarecrow itself. Boldly leaving her hiding place, Masha climbed inside the scarecrow, and what she saw made her freeze with horror. The burning eyes and distorted face of the killer met her gaze. She realized that it was not just a scarecrow, but an ancient curse, revived and thirsty for blood. Having challenged her fiend of darkness, Masha found strength and determination in herself. She grabbed a sharp knife, which was used for cooking in their campaign, and dealt the cursed scarecrow a fatal blow. Darkness engulfed the crime scene, and the scarecrow disappeared, leaving only a vague trace of his presence. Masha was wounded and exhausted, but survived. She returned to the camp, where she met rescuers who arrived after several long hours. They turned out to be local law enforcement officers who were familiar with the history of the terrible events associated with this area. The friends vowed never to forget the horrors and fear they experienced on that terrible hike. They became a warning to others, telling the story of the scarecrow and his curse. When they walked through the fields, there was always a wariness in their eyes. And now, every time passers-by stumble upon an old scarecrow in the forest, they keep the story of friends in their memory and never forget there may be much more behind each perishable and inexplicably scary object than it seems at first glance.